The Ballad of the Mountain Millionaire. Come and listen to the story about a man named Jed. The poor mountaineer barely kept his family fed. And then one day he was shooting at some food, and up to the ground come a bubbling crude.
Oil, that is.
Black gold.
Texas tea.
Well, the first thing you know, old Jed is a millionaire. The kinfolk said, "Jed, move away from there." Said, "California is the place you ought to be." So they loaded up the truck, and they moved to Beverly Hills, that is. Swimming pools. Movie stars. The Beverly Hillbillies. The bright golden sunshine of California fell upon the grand mansion, yet the hearts of its unique inhabitants remained deeply rooted in the simple virtues of the hills. Jed Clampett stood upon the polished driveway, looking out with a warm, thoughtful expression. Inside the great hall, a conversation was unfolding regarding a matter of great romantic urgency. Someone expressed a gentle concern, saying that they hoped she was not ailing. A reassuring voice quickly answered that she was not ailing at all, but was instead spending time with Mr. Drysdale, and that she would be right out after their meeting. The conversation turned toward local gossip and fond acquaintances when an observer looked over and asked if she was not the very girl that Shorty Kellums was so fond of. A bright smile appeared, followed by an inquiry asking how that little darling was doing. The news was momentous, for he was getting married tomorrow. The wedding was planned to take place at the Grand Homestead, prompting a warm invitation asking if she would like to come and share in the joy. A sigh of sweet melancholy followed, accompanied by a polite thank you, though she admitted she could never bear to see Shorty married to another woman. He was simply so cute, and they had shared such wonderful fun together. Memory lane opened up as someone recalled that Shorty always mentioned how much the two of them liked to go dancing. She beamed, agreeing that he was indeed a marvelous dancer and so very cuddly. However, reality returned with a gentle but firm reminder that she had officially had her last dance with little Cuddly. "What a pity," she murmured, just as the grand doors swung open. Granny and Mr. Clampett walked in, their presence instantly brightening the room. An enthusiastic greeting welcomed them, calling it a pleasant surprise and declaring that they were truly honored by their presence. Granny, with her characteristic practical mind, looked around and asked if they were supposed to have brought presents, or if perhaps there was a shiny ring to show everyone. The host flustered slightly, explaining that no, he simply meant they were honored. He urged them to come in. Jed thanked them warmly, explaining that they had just dropped by to invite the both of them to the grand wedding of Shorty. The revelation brought a look of understanding as the host remarked that Shorty was finally marrying Alverna. Everyone agreed that this was the case. The host then inquired when the happy event was scheduled to take place. Granny chuckled and clarified that while the wedding itself was scheduled for tomorrow at 3 o'clock, a rather frantic event had occurred yesterday when Shorty locked herself in the secretarial pool out of sheer panic. They asked if the bank folks could come. The answer depended entirely on the decision of the chief. They all expressed hope that they would be there, provided that Shorty did not attempt to run away again. A reassuring voice declared that all of that running was over and done with, and that Shorty could not wait for the ceremony. Miss Jane looked skeptical, asking if that was really true. She was told that she ought to see him, for he was currently acting just like a caged bear. In another part of the estate, the cage was quite literal. A voice bellowed from behind bars, pleading for Alverna to have a heart and let him out of that dead, blasted bear cage. Alverna stood outside, completely unmoved, telling him to stop complaining about the structure. After all, it was a magnificent wedding present from Mayor Heller. Shorty grumbled, asking why the mayor could not have given them silver like other normal people. Alverna defended the gift, stating that the mayor wisely decided this would be far more useful for a groom with wandering feet. She admired the craftsmanship, noting that it was beautifully constructed and that the mayor had built it himself. Shorty muttered that the man had to be a blacksmith to create such a monstrosity. Alverna reminded him that he had no one to blame but himself. He had chosen to run away to see those pretty secretaries at the bank. Shorty, trying his best to flatter his way out, asked if she truly called those girls pretty. He claimed that compared to Alverna, Those secretaries were nothing but a bunch of scarecrows. Alverna, playing along but remaining sharp, asked why he kept going to see them if that was the case. Shorty quickly spun a tale, saying he did it so he would enjoy seeing Alverna all the more. He explained that after looking at a bunch of turkeys, a man truly appreciates the peacock. Touched by the compliment, Alverna called him a gorgeous creature and told him to stop. She teased that his regular love had got him, driving a man wild. Shorty, seizing the moment, claimed that if he were out there, he would grab her and kiss her. Moved by this display of affection, Alverna reached for the key, saying that if he felt that way, she would unlock the cage for her sweet baby so he could come inside with her. But she stopped herself, choosing to forget it because folks had talked. She remembered that she had promised to preserve his lily-white reputation. Shorty sighed as she told him they must both be strong. She announced she would go finish preparing his lunch and was even baking him a cake. Shorty yelled after her to put a saw in it. Alverna turned, asking what he had said. Shorty quickly covered his tracks, shouting that he said he saw it and that it was a beauty. Outside the cage area, the family truck rumbled. Jed called out that he would put the truck around back. He gave a strict order to the young man standing guard, telling the boy to remember not to let Shorty out of that cage. Jethro puffed out his chest, promising that he would not, acknowledging that Shorty was a tricky little rascal. Jed warned him to be careful that Shorty did not outsmart him. Jethro took great offense to this, asking his uncle Jed if he had truly heard that. He turned to the empty space and declared that he possessed a 6th-grade brain. He asserted that there was no little country rude like Shorty Kellums who was going to outsmart a mind like his. Jethro boasted that his intelligence quotient was way up yonder, calling himself a giant intellect. Jed simply smiled and repeated the golden rule, telling the giant just not to let the man out of the cage. As Jed walked away, Shorty began making frantic gestures from behind the bars. Jethro watched him, wondering aloud what that sign language was all about. He walked over and told Shorty not to think he could trick anyone into letting him out, because it would not work. Jethro declared he was far too smart for that. Shorty, playing into the young man's vanity, agreed completely, saying he knew Jethro had a giant brain sitting right there between his ears. Shorty remarked that it must be a beauty and that he sure would like to have a look at it. Jethro was intrigued, asking how Shorty could possibly do that. Shorty explained that one could see it by looking directly into the ear. Jethro questioned if a brain could truly be seen that way. Shorty assured him it was a well-known fact, asking if Jethro did not know that. Jethro admitted he did not, explaining that since his eyes were on the front of his head and his ears were on the side, he had never been able to look in at his own brain. He confessed he sure would like to see that rascal of a brain, though. Shorty seized the opportunity, suggesting that Jethro unlock the door so Shorty could come out, take a peek, and report back on what it looked like. Jethro hesitated, refusing to let him out because he was too smart for that. Shorty quickly changed tactics, offering to let Jethro come into the cage instead, so Jethro could look at Shorty's brain. Jethro gasped, saying he could not wait to get a glimpse of that thing, assuming it must be a monster brain. Shorty agreed, saying lots of folks who had not seen it claimed he had the brain of a monster. He told Jethro to hunker down so he could get a good look. Jethro entered the cage and hunkered down. Shorty instructed him to face a certain way so the light would come in from the side, telling him to hold real still. Jethro waited expectantly, but then realized it was far too dark in there to see anything. He announced he was going to go get a flashlight. Shorty, now standing outside the open door, watched him. Jethro suddenly remembered his orders and noted that he was not supposed to let Shorty out. Shorty smiled mischievously, pointing out that Jethro did not let him out, but rather, Shorty had let himself out. Jethro considered this logic and smiled, relieved that in that case, Uncle Jed could not get mad at him. Shorty bade him farewell, saying he would see him later. Jethro called out, asking if Shorty had outsmarted him. Shorty laughed, asking how he could ever outsmart a brain like Jethro's. Jethro sat back down, comforted, wondering what he was ever worried about. A short while later, Jed returned and found the giant intellect sitting alone inside the locked enclosure. Jed asked what Jethro was doing in there. Jethro explained naturally that he was waiting for Shorty to come back with a flashlight. Jed, scratching his head, asked what Shorty needed with a flashlight. Jethro answered that Shorty was going to shine it in his ear to catch a glimpse of his giant brain. Jed asked if Shorty had really told him that. Jethro nodded proudly, saying you could hardly blame the man for wanting to see what was inside such a head. Jed sighed with a mixture of amusement and pity, admitting he had been wondering what was in there himself. He told the boy to come on out. Meanwhile, at the Grand Commerce Bank of Beverly Hills, Mr. Drysdale was facing his own set of problems. Miss Jane Hathaway walked into the executive office with a grim expression. She informed the chief that she was afraid she had bad news regarding Shorty Kellums, who had once again appeared in the secretarial pool. Mr. Drysdale looked up, completely unsurprised, stating that he had expected it, but was fully ready this time. He revealed that he had deputized one of his employees and ventured to say that Shorty was under arrest at this very moment. Down in the typing pool, a desperate negotiation was taking place. Shorty was pleading with a young lady who held him by the arm, begging her not to turn him into Mrs. Knight. He suggested they skip out of there and go have some fun. The young lady, named Gloria, refused, stating there was a reward for his arrest and she could use it. Shorty pointed out that there was no future for her anyway since he was getting married tomorrow. He argued that this gave them exactly 24 hours to paint the town red, have the fling of flings, and dance the night away. Gloria stood firm, reiterating that she needed that reward. Mr. Drysdale and Miss Jane arrived on the scene. Gloria proudly presented her prisoner. Shorty immediately protested, accusing the officer of brutality and cruelty. Mr. Drysdale asked what Gloria had done, and Shorty grumbled that she would not do anything, which was what made it so cruel. Gloria inquired about her reward, and the chief promised they would discuss that later. Mr. Drysdale confronted Shorty, telling him he was in for it now. Miss Jane pleaded for him not to hurt the little man. Shorty defied them, shouting that he was not afraid and that if they thought they could make him crawl, they had another thing coming. He demanded to know what they were going to do, asking if they would lock him in a vault or beat him. He declared that Drysdale could not scare him. Mr. Drysdale calmly delivered the ultimate threat, stating that he was turning Shorty over to Alverna Bradshaw. Shorty's bravado vanished instantly. He fell to his knees, begging for mercy, promising he would never come back and never bother them again if they just gave him another chance. He wept, saying he could not face it. Miss Jane watched the display, remarking how awful it was when they cracked like that. Later, outside the estate, Miss Jane and Mr. Drysdale examined Shorty's vehicle. Miss Jane noted that he would certainly never escape in it. Mr. Drysdale agreed, observing that it looked like the handiwork of that master blacksmith, Mayor Heller. Just then, Alverna appeared, thanking them for fetching over the prisoner, whom she corrected to mean the groom. Mr. Drysdale formally remanded Shorty into her custody, expressing hope that she could keep him secure until the wedding. Alverna promised to do her best, though she admitted she was going to miss old Chad. She mentioned that Mayor Heller had gone back to Silver Dollar City because with everybody gone, the population had dropped down to 24. She explained he had to get it back up to 25 so the town could qualify for government aid. Miss Jane sighed poetically, wishing they might have said au revoir, calling it two of the most beautiful words in the whole language. Alverna, misunderstood, thought she was talking about government aid. Inside the living room, the wedding rehearsal was called to order. Shorty asked with a glimmer of hope if they were not going to put him back in the cage. Alverna told him that was right, for he was instead going to practice saying I do. Shorty immediately begged to be put back in the cage. The minister called for the best man to enter with the groom. Shorty, looking at Jethro, asked if he had to be handcuffed to a best man with such long legs. Jethro complained, asking if they could skip the rehearsal and get to the part where they eat. Granny firmly reminded Jethro that they were not rehearsing the reception. The instructions continued, explaining that when the party reached the side, the manacle would be unlocked from the wrist, and the groom would be handcuffed directly to the bride. Shorty protested, asking if they did not even trust him to stick around during the ceremony. Orders were orders, he was told. Jethro, confused by the keys, asked if he was supposed to unlock his own handcuffs or Shorty's. Shorty quickly distracted the large youth, pointing toward the wall and claiming that the shadow looked exactly like a girl taking a sunbath. Jethro looked around, unable to see it, while Shorty urged him to keep looking. Granny stormed in, discovering the distraction. She declared that this was not going to be a shotgun wedding, though she noted it might have to be if the young man kept letting the groom get away. Jed asked if Shorty had indeed escaped, but Jethro assured him that Shorty had tried and failed, boasting that Uncle Jed had the giant brain on his side. The rehearsal attempted to proceed with the bridesmaid and flower girl taking their places. Ellie Mae stepped forward nicely beside the bride. Mr. Drysdale, acting as the authority figure, began the solemn words. He addressed the gathered beloved, stating they were there to witness the joining of the couple in happy wedlock. However, he quickly inserted a bank advertisement, comparing marriage to opening a joint account at the Commerce Bank of Beverly Hills where savings earned a full 5%. Jed interrupted, telling the chief that would do, though Granny wished to hear the traditional words because they made her cry. Mr. Drysdale's commercial words certainly made her unhappy. They decided to take it again from the top. Everyone returned to their places. Jethro asked if he could stay and watch. Mr. Drysdale was told strictly, no commercials this time. The chief sighed, complaining that they simply wanted the same old dull ceremony heard 100 times. They confirmed that they did. They called for the best man to enter with the groom once more. But as they looked around, Jethro stood alone. Jed asked where Shorty was, and Jethro noticed the family dog was acting strange. Shorty had disappeared again. Granny scolded Jethro, calling him a super boob for letting himself get outsmarted. Jethro asked if Shorty had outsmarted him, but Granny snapped that the ape did, which made Jethro feel better since he believed Shorty was the only one he needed to be careful of. Alverna began to weep, crying that she was beginning to get the suspicion that Shorty did not want to go through with this wedding. Jed comforted her, saying it was just a bad case of bridegroom jitters. Jethro realized where Shorty was headed, pointing out the secretarial pool. He noted Shorty did not have time to get far. They discovered Miss Jane's car was gone, taken by the runaway groom. Jed told Miss Jane to comfort the bride while he went to fetch the groom home. Back at the bank, Shorty was cornered once more. Jed confronted him, reminding him that he was getting married to Alverna Bradshaw in 24 hours and should just give up and face it. Shorty admitted his time was running out but refused to give up hope. Alverna arrived with a delicious meal she had prepared for him, though she questioned if she should have done so. Shorty asked if every condemned man was not entitled to a last meal. Alverna, offended, threatened to call off the wedding. Shorty asked eagerly if that was a promise. Miss Jane lectured him to behave like a gentleman and appealed to him as a man, but Shorty retorted that she did not even appeal to him as a woman. The insults flew back and forth, but Alverna remained resolute, stating that sticks and stones might break her bones, but they were getting married in the morning. Shorty was placed back in the security cage. Jethro stood guard, warning Shorty that he would not be tricked again. Shorty claimed all he wanted was for Jethro to fetch over Old Duke, so he could give the dog his lunch. Shorty described the meal in mouth-watering detail, speaking of a big, thick hunk of tender, juicy pot roast swimming in blood, and a delicious brown gravy, to be sopped up with fresh cornbread. Jethro's eyes widened. He declared that such food was far too good for a hound dog and demanded to eat it himself. Shorty passed the food over, and Jethro began eating happily. Shorty then claimed the food would not fit well through the bars and suggested Jethro come inside to get the rest. Jethro demanded Shorty's word of honor that he would not leave the cage. Shorty gave his word that leaving the cage was the absolute last thing on his mind. Jethro stepped inside, and Shorty promptly stepped out, locking the door behind him. Shorty grinned, noting that leaving was indeed his first, last, and only priority. Mr. Drysdale arrived at the cage to find his deputy, Jethro, sitting inside eating the lunch. The chief was furious. Gloria approached, reminding the chief of the 50 reward he had promised for Shorty's capture. Mr. Drysdale clarified that he had never mentioned the word dollar, revealing that the reward was actually a spectacular birthday cake that she would receive when she turned 50. Miss Jane called the chief rotten to the core, but Drysdale merely corrected her, saying he was simply rich. Jed walked in and looked at his nephew behind bars, asking what he was doing in there. Jethro swallowed his food and explained that he had outsmarted Duke by getting the pot roast. Jed shook his head, amazed by the boy's unique mind, wondering if Jethro was even in the room when brains were passed out. Suddenly, Ellie Mae rushed into the room, shouting out the good news. Mr. Drysdale had just received word that the 3-day waiting law for marriages had been officially revoked. Alverna and Shorty could get married immediately. Alverna called out for her darling sweetheart to come out, but the cage was empty except for Jethro. The little worm had escaped again. Mr. Drysdale phoned Jed with the ultimate update. He announced that he had successfully captured Shorty, who was currently handcuffed to his desk. To avoid any further escapes, the chief decreed that the wedding would take place right there in the bank executive office. Jed agreed it was a dandy idea and promised to fetch the bride right over. Miss Hathaway was dispatched to pick them up, and a judge was summoned. Under strict orders, no one was to unlock those handcuffs. Shorty, accepting his fate, looked at Gloria and remarked that they had shared some good times together. He requested one last dance, and she happily agreed. The office filled with the wedding party as Judge Marshall arrived. The judge noted he was a very busy man but was doing this as a personal favor. Jed introduced the blushing bride, Alverna Bradshaw, and stated they were ready when the judge was. However, the judge looked confused and informed them that he had to leave immediately because he had just performed a wedding in the next office for a happy couple. Mr. Drysdale and Alverna rushed into the adjacent office only to find Shorty and Gloria standing hand in hand, legally wed. Alverna screamed, demanding the marriage be annulled immediately. Shorty told her to keep her voice down because they were officially on a honeymoon. Jed looked at Shorty with deep gravity, reminding him of the sacred code of the hills. Shorty had been promised to Alverna, and therefore this sudden marriage would have to be sorted out tomorrow. Shorty agreed, and peace, in its own unusual way, returned to Beverly Hills. The grand story of the Mountain family continued to shine with warmth, laughter, and the everlasting values of love, family unity, and the simple joys of life.